What's up, workaholics? You're here with me today, Kiko Bilog. You're listening to Workaholic with Kiko Bilog, a podcast that helps professionals escape burnout and experience growth in their careers. Thanks so much for joining me today. Today's topic, I want to talk about something that a lot of people might be triggered by.
You have been warned.
Hopefully, not too much. But I want to talk about boundaries and why that's important if we really want to avoid burnout in our life. There's a study that shows that 64% of Gen Zers who took this survey from the Thriving Center of Psychology said that they had a difficulty creating boundaries in their life. And in that same study, 59% of millennials said that they had that same difficulty. 55% for Gen X and 42% of baby boomers. So you can see that the progression with every passing generation has actually increased in terms of how many people find this to be hard. And so what that basically looks like for all of us nowadays is that it's becoming harder and harder to set boundaries.
This is so hard.
And there's even this same study also that showed that 78% said that they want healthier boundaries, and 1 in 3 of them were saying that they were going to make it their New Year's resolution. When we think about boundaries, however, sometimes we think that it's much like anything that's important in life. It's easier said than done. We know it's important, and we say that we want to set boundaries, but then comes around this interaction with someone who doesn't respect your boundaries, and we violate them, or they violate them, and we allow them to. And that's the reason why I want to talk about this, because I'm sure that many of you here today, you're probably watching this because you have a hard time setting boundaries, and every time that someone doesn't respect that boundary or those boundaries that you put in your life, you also find it hard to kind of like respect it yourself. And sometimes we question whether, wait a minute, am I really, also respectful of my own boundaries? And I understand sometimes, it's a hard pill to swallow, but let's, take a look at it this way. Boundaries are, at the end of the day, it's important. But if we can't respect our own boundaries and we can't enforce our own boundaries, then don't expect anyone else to respect your boundaries. There will always be people in your life that will overstep, whether it's family, people at work, your boss, clients. We will always have people in our lives who will not respect our boundaries. And sometimes for, not for reasons like, they're awful people, they're jerks. Sometimes people just don't know our boundaries. They don't know if you're off work or not. They don't know whether you're the type of person who likes to work on weekends or not. Whether it's okay to, to kind of like ask for favors when in fact that's a favor that you're not willing to give. And you just find it hard to say no to a favor like that. There should be boundaries in every area of our life. And we should have boundaries for all types of people, whether it's family, friends, people in the workplace, even romantic relationships, even, when it comes to your own personal life. There's this book called Boundaries: When to Say Yes and How to Say No to Take Control of Your Life. It was written by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend, and I highly recommend it. This book, essentially, there's a lot of like really good lessons from here, but I want to share with you a couple that will really help you to set good boundaries. But it essentially starts with these two big ideas. Number one is boundaries are about ownership. If you want healthy boundaries, it's because you want to define what's within your control and what is not in your control. And having that sense of ownership is highly essential if you want good boundaries. And then secondly is boundaries in different areas of life. You want to have those boundaries in every area of your life. This book is amazing because it really addresses setting boundaries in all contexts. I'm also the kind of person sometimes that finds it hard to say no. The reason why I'm sharing this is because it's helped me, and hopefully it will help you if you have the same challenge as well. So the 5 steps of building better boundaries in your life. Number 1 is to identify where you need boundaries. It sounds pretty obvious, but sometimes, like when I thought about it, really, I realized that the reason why I didn't have good boundaries in my life is because I never really understood and identified where I needed boundaries. Simply asking yourself the question, where do I feel overwhelmed or resentful or taken advantage of? And sometimes because we're not honest with ourselves, we don't readily, when someone says like, do you need boundaries and where do you need boundaries in your life? Sometimes we don't have an answer because we don't really articulate that, or we don't really put it plain and obvious before us,
That would seem to be self-evident.
whether it's documenting it or really taking time to ask reflection questions. Even just trying to identify who in your life often crosses those boundaries that you set. We don't want to do that because many times it's people who are important to us, their family, and their parents, or their people in the workplace who do have some sense of influence over us, whether they're coworkers, their bosses, or people who pay us, or clients who pay us. And we don't want to just like point our finger and say that person does not respect boundaries. But it really starts with identifying who those people are in your life, and which areas of life you need to set boundaries, whether it's money or favors at work, or taking on job roles that are not part of your job description, but you find yourself still doing that. So it's the first step. It's really to identify where you need boundaries in your life. Second is to take ownership of your feelings and needs. When you're responsible for your own emotions, you're responsible for your own thoughts and your decisions. So instead of like going and blaming others who make you feel overwhelmed, and of course, I'm not saying that they're off the hook, right? People who don't respect our boundaries, even if we've told them many times that you shouldn't do this. You can't borrow money from me, or you can't just leave me to take care of this job role when it's supposed to be your job. Even if you've told them many times, they are of course still responsible, but you also have to realize that the reason why that kind of toxic interaction is happening in our life is because we allow it. And so in some way or another, I hate to say this, guys, but it's still your fault.
So it's my fault.
And that's something that I say with love, because I realize that that's also something I had to realize myself, that Kiko, this is the reason why people don't respect your boundaries here, is because you're allowing them to overstep. And we need to reinforce that boundary and say that this is my responsibility. I have to take ownership of my boundaries because they are my boundaries. I can't expect people to go and say, oh, I know these are the boundaries that they've set and I have to respect it. So taking ownership of your feelings, and then also taking ownership of your needs. The third one is to communicate your boundaries clearly and directly. So like, let's say for example, you have a boundary where you don't take phone calls in the middle of the night, and then a friend calls you in the middle of the night. You can just tell that person, I go to bed early, so I won't be answering this call at 9 p.m. You can call me tomorrow morning. Sounds simple, right? But many times we just like to just say, oh, you know what? I can't take the call, and we make excuses. Oh, I'm busy. I don't know what to do. I don't know what it is with us sometimes. And even me included, where we just can't like take ownership of our boundaries. It's like we are sorry to people for having boundaries.
Can you forgive me, Sugar Puss? Look, I don't know what I was thinking. All right, I'm sorry.
But truth of the matter is, like 99% of the time, if you really just communicate your boundaries to people, they will respect it. They won't always remember it. And so again, going back to the second next step, to really take ownership of your boundaries, but you also have the responsibility to communicate that to people. Don't expect them to know something that they don't know, right? And so for example, like your boss comes and gives you like last minute work, and then I mean, I'm a boss. Like many times I don't realize that, especially since our team, we work remotely, that a person on my team might already have too much on their plate. And so I really love the culture in our company though, because it's open. It's like, even if we work remotely, even if I'm the boss and people who work for me, they're honest and tell me, I'm overwhelmed with work right now. I have too much on my plate. And so I tell them, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. You need to communicate those boundaries clearly and directly, because truth of the matter is, no one's a mind reader, and not everyone is as aware of our overwhelm or our frustration as we are if we don't make it clear. We can only control what we can control. Going back to that idea of ownership, right? When you have boundaries in place and people don't respect them, we can't control how people respond. But we can control how we communicate our boundaries, how we enforce them. And then the next step basically is just to say no without guilt. And many times it really goes back to this savior mentality, this messiah complex that we have, that we feel like we have to help people because if we can't and if we don't, then we're just bad people. And of course, there is a beauty and there is an importance to being a person who is always willing to help. But it's also realizing that you're just human, that you're limited, that if you can't help, then you can't help. And that doesn't always make you a bad person. If you're able to help and you want to help, and it does not require as much suffering and sacrifice to the point that it's going to overwhelm you, frustrate you, burn you out, then by all means, there is still a place for, self-denial and helping other people. But we also have to really be careful about that very thin line between being a person who likes to deny the self and help others versus also being the person that realizes I can't give from an empty cup. And so if I try to help people but I can't even help myself, that's just not a good place to be. Because how can you be of service, be of value, to add value to people if you're just not in the right place? Does that make sense? And so I really hope that we realize when you say no, what you're doing is saying yes to yourself first so that you can say yes to others more. What aspect of my life do I still feel like I have to be the Messiah, the Savior of the people around me? Is I realized that not all people who come to us for help really want help to begin with. I'll give you an example. Since we talk a lot about money, right? When someone comes to you and says, "Oh, can I borrow money from you?" and you say no, and then you offer them, advice on, well, you know what? You want to borrow money because you want to buy an iPhone, but maybe you don't need an iPhone. Maybe you can buy a cheaper phone. And that's good advice, But this person is not going to listen to you because all they want is money and they want an iPhone.
Sad ass.
And that person doesn't really want your help. They just want to be enabled. Is this really going to help the person if I do this? Or am I just going to enable a bad habit, a bad character trait that's, just going to make their life way worse? So we need to be careful about that. Lastly is you have to expect resistance. There will be resistance. There will be times where people will know that you have a boundary in this area of your finances, your life, your work, but they're not going to respect it anyways. And in these times, it's up to you to stand firm. Don't expect them to understand that one day they'll say, "You know what, I understand that this person has boundaries." Maybe they will, but you also have to prepare for the worst, that they won't respect your boundaries. There will be people who will guilt trip you. "Oh, I thought we were close. You know what? I raised you ever since you were young." And you know where that's heading to. And this is how you repay me. I mean, some people will get angry and label you as a terrible person. Money really changed you. You just succeeded in life, and all of a sudden you have no care for people anymore.
Really?
And bottom line, you know what? We all know this is not true. I'm sure the people who say that, they know that's not true, but they're using that basically to manipulate you. You're showing them that I can manipulate this person. Distance and love are two different things. You can love people from a distance. The reason why you set boundaries is because you want to say yes more to the things that do deserve your time, your attention, your energy, your headspace. If you're the kind of person that has a hard time saying no, realize that your no is what empowers you to say yes to the right things, the right people, the right opportunities. If I say no now, I can say yes to the people who I really want to say yes to. Which one would you rather say yes to? Hopefully this was something that brought insight and value to you. If you learned something important, if something resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Just go ahead and share what really stood out to you. If there's something that you don't agree with, by all means, share it also below. I'm not an expert at this. This is still a topic I'm trying to figure out as well as I live life as a person who struggles with maintaining his own boundaries. But yeah, hopefully this was helpful. And thank you so much for watching. And I'll see you next time around.